Despite the fact that the 5th season of The Chosen is still a few months away, we already have more in-depth information about the forthcoming season than we have about any of the seasons that have come before it. On the basis of the fundamental information that we know, as well as the fact that controversy follows each new season of The Chosen, we are able to be quite certain not only that there will be controversies associated with Season 5, but also that certain of those issues will be more prevalent than others. I'm going to take a look at the minefield that The Chosen Season 5 will have to navigate if it shows Jesus' prophecy regarding the destruction of the temple and the arrival of the Son of Man in this video. In the 5th season of The Chosen, what exactly is going on, and why is it so controversial? During the 4th season of The Chosen, the story concludes shortly prior to the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. On many occasions, Dallas Jenkins has stated that the 5th season of The Chosen will start up where the 4th season left off and will center on Holy Week, which will include the events leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus, but will not include the crucifixion itself. This is the portion of Jesus' life that is discussed in the Gospels in the most detail, and as a result, we can really be fairly confident about the events that will take place in the 5th season of The Chosen. One of these occurrences is the prophecy that Jesus made regarding the abomination of desolation, the destruction of the temple, and the coming of the Son of Man. This prophecy has been the subject of an unending amount of discussion among Christians. Following a visit to the temple with his followers and hearing them admire the temple's wonderful construction, Jesus answers in a manner that is unexpected at some point during his final week in Jerusalem. During the time that Jesus was leaving the temple and making his way away, his followers came to show him the various structures that were located within the temple. However, he responded to them by saying, "You see all of these, do you not? To tell you the truth, I am telling you that there will not be a single stone that is stacked on top of another that will not be thrown down." While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him in a confidential manner and said, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" After that, Jesus responded to them by saying, "Be sure that no one misguides you. Because many people will come in my name and proclaim, 'I am the Christ,' and they will send many people in the wrong direction. You are going to hear about wars as well as rumors about wars. Take care not to be startled, for this is something that is going to happen, but the end is not yet here. Because of this, there will be a rising of nation against nation, as well as kingdom against kingdom, and there will be earthquakes and famines in a number of different locations. Every one of these is just the beginning of the labor and delivery discomfort. Furthermore, they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and for the sake of my name, you will be loathed by all countries. After that, a great number of people will abandon one another, betray one another, and despise one another. And there will be a great number of false prophets who will mislead a great number of people. And because there will be an upsurge in antisocial behavior, the love of many people will become icy. However, the one who stays through until the very end will be saved. And then the end will come, and this gospel of the kingdom will be spread across the entire world as a testament to all countries throughout that time. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation the prophet Daniel described as standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then people who are in Judea should leave and go to the mountains. Allow the person who is on the housetop to refrain from going down to retrieve the items that are inside his house, and allow the person who is in the field to refrain from turning around to retrieve his cloak. When those days came around, it was a terrible time for women who were pregnant and for those who were nursing their children. Make a prayer that your flight does not take place during the cold or on a Sabbath. Because of this, there will be a tremendous tribulation, the likes of which have never been from the beginning of the world until the present day, and they will never occur again. Furthermore, if those days had not been cut short, there would have been no saving for any human person. For the sake of those who have been chosen, however, those days will be cut short. In that case, if someone were to tell you, "Look, here is the Christ as well as there he is," you should not believe it, because there will be fake Christs and false prophets who will come into existence and display great signs and wonders in order to mislead, if at all possible, even those who are chosen. As you can see, I have warned you in advance. Thus, if they tell you, "Look, he is in the wilderness," you should not walk out into the wilderness. This is not something you should believe if they tell you, "Look, he is in the inner rooms." The arrival of the Son of Man will be like lightning that comes from the east and illuminates as far as the west. This is because lightning comes from the east. In the location where the dead body is located, the vultures will congregate. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken immediately after the tribulation that occurred during those days, the prophet prophesied. The sign of the Son of Man will then appear in heaven. And then all the tribes of the earth will be in mourning. Following this, they will witness the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. And he will send out his angels with a great trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. He will do this from top to bottom. You can learn a valuable lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branch becomes tender and begins to push forth its leaves, you will know that summer is going to arrive soon. In the same way, when you experience all of these things, you are aware that he is close by, just at the entrance. I am telling you the truth when I claim that this generation will not eventually die out until all of these things take place. Heaven and earth will eventually be destroyed, but the words that I speak will endure forever. However, with regard to that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father knows. In the same way that the days of Noah were different, the arrival of the Son of Man will be the same. For as in those days before the flood they were feasting and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. There will then be two men in the field. One of them will be captured, and the other will be left. At the mill there will be two women grinding. One of them will be seized, while the other will be left. Because of this, you should remain awake, because you do not know when your Lord will come to see you. If the master of the house had been aware of the time of night at which the burglar was expected to arrive, he would have remained awake and would not have allowed his home to be stolen into. This is something that you should be aware of. That is why you too need to be prepared, because the Son of Man is going to come at an hour that you do not anticipate. Matthew 24:144, English Standard Version. This prophecy has generated many conflicting interpretations. Some interpreters believe Jesus' words refer exclusively to events that have already taken place. Others believe that they anticipate recent and future events that are part of the last days. Still others believe that Jesus refers to events in the first century and the future. If The Chosen depicts Jesus' prophecy, it could try to stay neutral in these debates by presenting the biblical text without commentary or interpretation. But when the show depicts Jesus' difficult teachings, it generally doesn't give us just the straight text. Instead, The Chosen adds additional explanation or commentary that is meant to clarify what Jesus does and doesn't mean. If The Chosen provides additional commentary on Jesus' prophecy about the temple. In the context of eschatology and Israel, what is at stake? There are some Christians who are not particularly worried with how the prophecy of Jesus is interpreted, and they may not have a strong interest in eschatology, which is the study of the things that will happen in the end. Some Christians, on the other hand, place a significant amount of importance on the end times. In the event that The Chosen portrays Jesus' prophecy in a manner that goes against a specific belief system regarding the end times, it will almost likely be subject to criticism. Additionally, due to the fact that The Chosen is connected to the Jenkins family, it may be subjected to an even higher level of scrutiny in this regard. Other than the Bible itself, the Left Behind series is among the most well-known representations of the end times that have ever been produced in the history of fiction. The books were converted into a number of films, graphic novels, and video games, and they sold millions of copies all over the world. There was a time when the unique striped cover of the Left Behind novels appeared to be everywhere. This is something that everyone who grew up during the 1990s and early 2000s can attest to. The initial Left Behind books were the product of a partnership between Jerry B. Jenkins, who was primarily responsible for the biblical and theological foundations of the series, and Tim LaHaye, a pastor of the Protestant Evangelical Church. LaHaye was primarily responsible for the biblical and theological underpinnings of the series. Needless to say, Dallas Jenkins, the inventor of The Chosen, is the son of Jerry B. Jenkins, who is Dallas's father. Even among Protestant evangelicals, the Left Behind books are not quite as popular as they were when they were first published, despite the fact that they were extremely successful during their own time. It's possible that this is due, at least in part, to the criticism that the books have gotten since they were published. There is a possibility that a portion of it is also attributable to a general drop in the popularity of conventional dispensationalism, which is the eschatological approach that serves as the foundation for Left Behind. Despite the fact that traditional dispensationalism continues to be a significant strain of American evangelicalism, it is not nearly as prominent and prevalent as it once was. This is because it has been overshadowed by other emerging theological positions, such as progressive dispensationalism and Reformed post- and amillennialism. In the event that The Chosen displays Jesus' prophecy regarding the destruction of Jerusalem, a significant number of viewers will examine the scenario in great detail due to Dallas's familial tie to the Left Behind books. Those who are devoted followers of the film Left Behind would anticipate that the younger Jenkins will design the scene in a manner that is consistent with the work of his father. In the event that the show takes a different route or makes an attempt to sidestep the problem, they can feel dissatisfied. Those who are critical of the Left Behind books might also anticipate that The Chosen will have a dispensational influence on the show, and they might be too eager to pass judgment on what the show features. Despite my continued conviction, I am of the opinion that the significance of a show, such as The Chosen, ought to be evaluated only on the basis of what it actually displays or says. Whether Dallas' father's ideas and work are important to him is a matter of opinion. Nonetheless, I do not understand why they should be important to viewers like me. The only thing that matters is what they show on screen. There is no doubt that Dallas connections may play a role in determining what is shown on screen. Yet, it is also possible that such factors are utterly inconsequential. Alternatively, there may be a dozen other influences that are significantly more significant. There is a possibility that one day there will be a biographer or historian who has access to insider information and who will be able to evaluate the influences on The Chosen in an objective manner. However, we are not in a position to do so. Having said that, I have brought up Dallas' relation to Left Behind, since the types of individuals who criticize the show frequently do believe that such things are significant. For instance, the dispute surrounding the law of Moses. There is yet another reason why the portrayal of Jesus' prophecy in The Chosen might be able to spark a very heated debate in the context of our particular cultural moment. In the realm of international politics, the current situation in Israel represents one of the most divisive divides that exists today. There are a considerable number of Christians in the United States that either support the Palestinian cause or are suspicious of Israel's war, despite the fact that a big percentage of American Christians, particularly evangelicals, are in favor of Israel in its ongoing struggle. The most fervent supporters of Israel tend to be older, while the most ardent opponents of Israel tend to be considerably younger. This distinction is mostly based on generational differences. It is possible that the interpretation of Jesus' prophecy is connected to the level of support for Israel, or lack thereof, among certain groups of Christians. As we will see in the following section, many interpretations of the passage, particularly dispensationalism and futurism, place great emphasis on the significance of modern Israel and the reconstruction of the temple. Even though the prophecy of Jesus is not the only source that supports this viewpoint, it is an essential component in the construction of this worldview. On the other side, there are Christians who think that the prophecy of Jesus implies that God's purpose for the nation of Israel and for the temple came to an end definitively in the year 70 AD, and that the church has now supplanted Israel as the people of God and the genuine temple. Whatever The Chosen chooses to do with this time, it will be interpreted as a political statement. This is due to the fact that the interpretation of Jesus' prophecy has had an impact on the political outlook of a significant number of Christians. If, on the one hand, the program is able to weaken the futurist interpretation, then theological supporters of Israel will view it as an assault on the nation's right to exist. On the other hand, if the play were to embrace the futurist interpretation, it might enrage Christians who are pro-Palestinian or who are critical of the state of Israel. It is highly likely that there will be detractors who accuse The Chosen of being political, regardless of the circumstances. In what ways has the prophecy of Jesus been interpreted? Many different interpretations have been offered for the prophecy that Jesus made. Neither will I make an effort to cover all of them, nor will I provide an extremely extensive discussion of any one particular strategy. On the other hand, for those of you who are not familiar with eschatology, the following is a broad review of 3 general views to this passage. The fugitive. According to the interpretation of Matthew 24 that is based on the future and the similar passages, the majority of the events that are mentioned in Jesus' prophecy are either still in the future as viewed from a contemporary perspective, or quite recent, that is, either after the establishment of the current state of Israel or some other time. The holy place is a temple in Jerusalem that has not yet been destroyed and rebuilt. A future worldwide Antichrist, his false prophet, or an image of the Antichrist that will be set up in the temple makes up the abomination of desolation. All 3 of these possibilities are possible. The term Great Tribulation alludes to a time period that was marked by intense persecution and a catastrophe on a worldwide scale. The term Coming of the Son of Man can refer to either the rapture of the elect that occurs before or during the tribulation period, or the second coming that occurs after the tribulation period. When Jesus makes the proclamation that this generation will not perish until these events take place, he is either referring to the entire population of Israel, generation equals lineage, or to the generation of individuals who are present before the beginning of the tribulation. As a result of the fact that the prophecy of Jesus cannot be fulfilled until the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem, there is a basis for supporting the present state of Israel. Individualism. According to the preterist interpretation of Matthew 24, as well as the texts that are analogous to it, when Jesus prophesied, he was referring to the events that took place around the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD. This occurred a few decades after Jesus' tenure on earth, but it was a very long time before modern times. The Temple of Herod, which was demolished by Rome during the siege of Jerusalem, is referred to as the Holy Place. It is possible that the abomination of desolation refers to either the Roman army, which was responsible for the destruction of Jerusalem and the worship of vile idols, or the Zealots, who were responsible for the violence that filled the temple and ultimately led to the destruction of Jerusalem. Great Tribulation is a term that describes the persecution and spectacular tragedies that occurred in the days preceding up to and following the Jewish insurrection. These events took place during the time period. One interpretation of the phrase, coming of the Son of Man, is that it is a reference to Jesus coming up to, or ascending to, the Ancient of Days and receiving power and authority, as described in Daniel 7. Another interpretation is that it is a vision of the spiritual reality that lies behind the earthly judgment of Jerusalem. This interpretation is comparable to Old Testament depictions of God coming on the clouds in judgment, which frequently refer to spiritual realities that lie behind historical events that took place on earth, for example, 1 Samuel 22. Jesus is referring to the generation of people that he is addressing to when he makes the prediction that this generation will not pass away before these events take place. Generation is a term that refers to age cohorts, such as Gen Z or Gen X. It is not necessary to rebuild the temple because it has already accomplished what it was intended to do. A significant number of preterists, though not all of them, are of the opinion that God's plan for the country of Israel has been completed, and that the contemporary state of Israel is a secular state just like any other, and that it does not play a special part in God's plans for the people of Israel today. On the basis of other passages in the New Testament, there are preterists who continue to believe in the possibility of a second coming of Christ in the future, while there are also preterists who believe that all references to the coming of Jesus have already been fulfilled. Using a hybrid approach, some interpretations of Matthew 24 and its counterparts attempt to find a way to include both the events that occurred in the year 70 AD and a future tribulation or second coming. Among these, the first one is the double fulfillment model, which says, a pattern is being established by the prophecy of Jesus, which was partially realized by the events that occurred in the year 70 AD and will be more fully fulfilled by events that occur in the future. In addition to the Temple of Herod, the phrase holy place can also apply to a reconstructed temple. On the other hand, there are many who subscribe to the belief that in the second fulfillment, the temple will be replaced by church organizations as the holy place of God. The term abomination of desolation can be used to allude to both the Roman soldiers and the forces that will belong to the Antichrist in the future. The term Great Tribulation alludes to calamities and persecutions that occurred around the year 70 AD as well as at some point in the future. It is commonly believed that the only component of the prophecy that did not come true in the year 70 AD was the coming of the Son of Man. The other hybrid interpretation, which was devised by Professor John Murray, contends that Jesus is predicting two distinct occurrences, both of which his disciples believe would occur simultaneously, but which have turned out to be separated in time. Matthew 24:2 is the sole passage in which Jesus makes a prediction about the destruction of the temple. There are two questions that his disciples ask in response to this. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your arrival and of the end of the age? And what will be the sign of it is written in Matthew 24:3. Matthew 24:4-14 contains the first part of Jesus' response, which is an outline of the period of the church. After that, he responds to the first question that the disciples had, Matthew 24:15-28. And then he moves on to discussing the second question, Matthew 24:29-44. The Temple of Herod, which was demolished in the year 70 AD, is an example of a holy place. When referring to the Roman soldiers that besieged and destroyed Jerusalem, the phrase abomination of desolation is usually used. The term Great Tribulation relates to the events that occurred around the year 70 AD, whereas the term tribulation of those days refers to a more extensive and ongoing season known as the times of the Gentiles, Luke 21:24. During this period, Jerusalem is still under the dominion of Gentiles, and the Jewish people disperse themselves around the world. It is the future second coming that is referred to as the coming of the Son of Man. Due to the fact that this is not a site about prophecy, I am not currently interested in attempting to argue for one method over another. If I'm being completely honest, I haven't even come to terms with my own beliefs around this issue. This is the reason why I have made every effort to accurately portray each strategy. Christians are ready to judge one another for coming to a different conclusion regarding issues that simply aren't very obvious. This happens far too frequently. But regardless of the values that you have personally, as well as the attitude that the chosen adopts, I urge you to interact with people who have a different perspective on things while maintaining a spirit of humility, grace, and selflessness. Should the prophecy of Jesus be adapted for the fifth season of The Chosen? Taking into consideration the potential for controversy that may be associated with the portrayal of Jesus' prophecy, there are a number of different routes that The Chosen could take to adapt the story. The clarification of the words of Jesus and the adoption of an interpretive position. As I mentioned earlier, The Chosen does not provide us with an easy interpretation of the tough truths that Jesus imparted. Speeches that are lengthy and complicated in the original source material are portrayed as more digestible dialogues. For example, the commissioning of the disciples, Matthew 10. See also Season 3, Episode 2, or the born-again teaching, John 3. See also Season 1, Episode 7, are examples of such speeches. In these dialogues, the disciples ask Jesus for clarification or offer it when he says something that is unclear. The short, pithy sayings that are found in the source material, such as Jesus' response to Martha, Luke 10:41-42, see also Season 4, Episode 5, are frequently fleshed out into larger, more complex speeches that are intended to counteract misunderstandings and misapplications. This method to understanding the meaning of Jesus' prophecy is appropriate in many respects. There are a few things that Jesus addresses in this section that will be difficult to understand for the average observer. Furthermore, with such a lengthy and complicated speech, it will be challenging for viewers to follow along. In light of the fact that the prophecy opens with the disciples questioning Jesus, it would make a great deal of sense for the program to interrupt the speech with questions from the disciples that clarify what Jesus is trying to say. On the other hand, if The Chosen adopts this strategy, it will almost certainly end up preferring a certain position. Interpretation is the result of clarification. When people are pushed toward one possible sensation, it nearly invariably means that they are taken away from other senses that are competing with it. There are, without a doubt, some minor clarifications that can be made, but they will not have any impact on the larger disputes that are taking place over interpretation. However, the sections that are the subject of the most controversy are precisely those that are the most difficult and obscure parts of the speech. In the previous section, I suggested that becoming involved in such disputes could result in a large amount of controversy and conflict. Trying to escape the passage. The Chosen does not adapt each and every passage that is found in the Gospels. There are some tales and lessons that are not included in the program simply due to the fact that they are similar to other tales or lessons that are included in the presentation. In the event that everything was depicted, the program would result in a sense of repetition. In addition, there are instances in which it seems as though The Chosen does not include some teachings and stories because of the difficulty involved in expressing them. The infamous and contentious omission of the Transfiguration led to widespread criticism. Following the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus' instruction about eating his flesh and drinking his blood was also deleted. This may have been for a number of reasons, including the fact that Catholics and Protestants are so fiercely opposed about the meaning of his teaching and what it reveals about the nature of communion. It would be possible for the Chosen to avoid participating in the interpretive dispute if they just left out the prophecy that Jesus made. When I consider the number of issues that the Chosen has already been involved in, I can understand why the show might want to avoid getting involved in another one. This is actually what appears to be the case with the majority of popular gospel adaptations. The only renderings of the text that I have personally encountered are those that are exhaustive and word-for-word reproductions, such as the Lumo project. On the other hand, I find it difficult to believe that the program will completely sidestep the prophecy that Jesus made. Due to the fact that the majority of gospel adaptations are films with a short running time, it is simple to rationalize the decision to eliminate a lengthy and intricate speech. The Chosen, on the other hand, is devoting an entire season consisting of 8 episodes to the subject of Holy Week. Despite the fact that this section of the Gospels contains a great deal of content, a sizable portion of that material is actually connected to the prophecy that Jesus made. In addition to the speech itself, the cleansing of the temple, Matthew 21:12-13, the cursing of the fig tree, Matthew 21:18-22, and many of Jesus' parables and other speeches, Matthew 21:28-45, 22-114, 23, 24, 45, 52, 25, are often interpreted in connection to Jesus' prophecy, whatever way you want to understand it. It is impossible for the Chosen to navigate around the prophecy and the subjects that it discusses without destroying or concealing fundamental aspects of the narrative of Holy Week. Description that is straightforward. In spite of the fact that the Chosen frequently offers us an interpretation of the teachings of Jesus, there are occasions when the show presents us with a portrayal that is rather basic and stays relatively faithful to the original source material. Within the context of this particular scenario, the benefit of doing so is that it eliminates the possibility of anyone accusing the performance of favoring or promoting a specific interpretative or theological perspective. Every spectator in the theologically diverse audience of The Chosen would have the freedom to interpret and comprehend the prophecy that Jesus made according to his or her own point of view. There is no one who would criticize the program for putting a thumb on the scale, despite the fact that the sequence can still spark some disputes between viewers who have different points of view. The strategy that I like best is the one that comes in second place among all the others. Although I don't object when the show interprets and makes an effort to clarify the teachings of Jesus, I do believe that it is wise to exercise more restraint when dealing with parts that are more ambiguous or that are the subject of discussion. In spite of this, it can be quite aggravating for viewers when there is no explanation provided for portions that are unclear or challenging. A significant number of people would have a difficult time following and comprehending this lengthy and convoluted speech, as I have mentioned. This is the reason why I advocate a different approach, offering a number of different interpretations that are competing. One of the benefits of having a show that features a number of different characters is that it allows you to offer the audience with a number of different points of view without unquestionably preferring one point of view over another. Despite the fact that the viewpoint of Jesus in The Chosen is considered authoritative, the show also includes a number of perspectives that are not considered authoritative, such as those of the disciples. In several instances, the chosen has permitted the disciples to discuss a difficult theological subject from their own restricted viewpoints without delivering a definite and authoritative response through Jesus. This has occurred on a number of occasions. During the most recent episode of the show, this strategy was utilized to depict the moment when Jesus renames Simon and announces, "On this rock I will build my church." While the disciples speculate and argue the significance of Jesus' words, Jesus himself never provides a full explanation. During the time that Jesus is uttering his prophecy, we are aware that he is having conversations with a number of his disciples. It would not be difficult for the disciples to express varying interpretations of the words that Jesus had spoken, and for Jesus to either fail to hear them or insist on not providing clarification. For instance, when Jesus says, "This generation will not pass away," the disciples might jump in and start arguing with him, asking, "Wait, do you mean the people alive right now, or the people alive when all of this starts?" Jesus might respond by saying, "No, he means the Jewish people." Jesus might then play coy by saying something like, "I'll let you figure that out." I could also see the program making a metatextual statement by having the disciples begin to argue over what Jesus meant, and then having Jesus basically say, "These matters are difficult." Both of these scenarios would be interesting to me. Be sure not to lose sight of the most important thing, which is to demonstrate love for one another. By taking this method, the show would be able to break up the lengthy statement and provide potential clarifications, all without definitely preferring one perspective over the others. This seems to be the best approach to strike a balance between the different issues that are involved in depicting Jesus' prophecy. Despite the fact that I am convinced that there will still be disagreements, the program could not possibly reflect every interpretive perspective, and some people will be upset at the very mention of certain interpretations. Do you believe that this particular moment will cause controversy in the 5th season? In your opinion, which of the several adaptive approaches would make the most ideal sense? Could you please share your thoughts in the comments section below? Since I am not a specialist in eschatological, I would be grateful for your opinion if you believe that my description of an interpretive approach to Matthew 24 needs to be revised. On the other hand, I have little interest in discussing the arguments that support the various interpretations, at least not in this particular setting. However, this does not imply that such topics are not worthy of being studied and discussed. It is only that this particular film is not intended to cover such topics. A brief warning is given before to the beginning of episode 5 regarding the fact that the opening sequence is extremely delicate. This is something that I, as someone who has seen a lot, kind of overlooked. To tell you the truth, I was taken aback by it. My wife is pregnant, so I am extra sensitive to pregnancy-related news. 2 weeks ago, at the beginning of the scene, a doctor is roused from his sleep in the middle of the night by a patient who is pleading with him to help them. The woman who is pregnant is bleeding in a manner that is reminiscent of Veronica's bleeding, and she is placed on the table as if she were going to give birth. Regrettably, it turns out that the pregnancy ended in a stillbirth or a miscarriage. It is difficult to determine what stage the pregnancy is through. Not until then is it made clear to us that the lady who is pregnant is actually Eden. Now that we are back in the present, Eden and Simon are quietly preparing his lunch for the day, and the tension is evident. Simon commits the usual mistake of a spouse by feignedly conceding that, "Whatever it is, you're right, and I'm sorry." In contrast to Simon, we, the audience, are aware of the seriousness of the situation where she is currently finding herself. Gaius and Simon are engaged in a conversation about the disparities between the ways of life of Jews and Gentiles as they are working on the system. Simon expresses his dissatisfaction with Gaius' suggestion, and Gaius is compelled to explain to him that in order to be effective in your apology, you must be aware of the reason for which you are apologizing. Gaius adds that he has 2 children while they are conversing. The first child is his own, and the second child is a servant child that his family has reared as if it were their own. Despite the fact that Simon makes fun of him a little bit for keeping a slave, it is obvious that Gaius is really concerned about something that he is not yet ready to communicate. This is probably certainly part of the preparation for the tale of Jesus healing the servant of the centurion that is told in Matthew 8-5:13. After some time has passed, as Jesus and the disciples are eating breakfast, Eden is present in the room, and Jesus observes that she is obviously having difficulty. In the instant that Jairus arrives to beg for the life of his daughter, she is present, and it is obvious that this is the moment that sets her off. In spite of this, she follows Jesus as he travels to Jairus' daughter in order to heal her. In their ongoing conversation, Simon and Gaius continue to explore the various ways in which Jewish and pagan believers worship and practice their religion. Simon makes a remark on how their work reminds him of the prophecy of Jeremiah, in which God states that people have rejected the source of living water for ruined cisterns that are unable to hold water, Jeremiah 2:9-13. On the other hand, Gaius makes the observation that if this circumstance is in fact a fulfillment of that prophecy, then the Jews of Capernaum must have committed some incorrect action. When they witness the mob rushing toward Jesus, they decide to investigate the situation. They are present for the healing of Veronica, and Simon is present for the healing of Jairus' daughter. Eden is also present for the healing of Veronica. When the cure is complete, Simon joins the other disciples in the Sea of Galilee to play and spend time together. The celebration is going on, but Eden is watching from the shore, and she is doing her best to hide the agony that she is experiencing. The argument between James and John regarding John's acquaintance with Thomas continues to take place within Zebedee's home. Thomas, who is still away on his trip to Roma's father, provides us with a brief report on his situation. During the course of their conversation on Roma's refined taste, Zebedee is directed to inform his sons that he has decided to sell the yacht. His father had passed away while waiting for the Messiah, and he says that he inherited the fishing business from him. However, in contrast to his father, he has already encountered the Messiah. They were supposed to get their food from the fishing, but now that his sons have better jobs, he is ready for a shift in his own line of work as well. An olive grove is going to be purchased by him. After some time has passed, Zebedee, Judas, Tamar, and Mary Magdalene are observing a field that they are maybe considering acquiring. However, the vendor says that the reason the trees are dying is because his father has become unwell and is unable to take care of them themselves. They make an offer to purchase the field and ask the seller to occupy it for a period of time so that they may learn about the business. Following the closing credits, we transition to Jairus having a conversation with a physician about the status of his daughter. The physician informs him that there is nothing that can be done. She will pass away in the near future. He makes a generous offer to arrange for professional mourners, which is a ceremony that is required by Jewish custom. However, Jairus declines his offer and instead rushes out to look for assistance. Subsequently, Yosef discovers Jairus at the synagogue, where he is ruminating on various biblical scriptures concerning healing. There is a request from Jairus to Yosef to take him to Jesus, but Yosef is unaware of where Jairus is. The fact that he is aware of Andrew's residence, on the other hand, brings them there. When they come, Judas meets them. He is careful since he is aware that they are Pharisees. In spite of the fact that they have explained the problem to Judas, he continues to maintain that he is unable to assist them, but that Simon might be able to, so they go to Simon's house. Then, at long last, they come across Jesus. After Jairus has finished reading Yosef's tale, he confesses to Jesus that he is aware of his identity and then goes to his knees, pleading with him to heal him. After elaborating on the fact that he is a healer of both the physical and spiritual realms, Jesus lifts Jairus up and agrees to accompany him, all the while praising Jairus' faithfulness. They are slowed down by a large crowd as they make their way to Jairus' residence. After having a healing encounter with Veronica, Jesus is able to persuade the crowd to refrain from approaching Jairus' daughter in order to continue their efforts to assist her. As they are about to arrive, they are confronted by the unfortunate sight of a Pharisee leader and the sound of professional mourners. Miriam, Jairus' daughter, passed away while he was absent, according to the Pharisee, who describes the situation. In a condition of utter devastation, Jairus insists to Jesus that he arrived as quickly as he possibly could. Despite the Pharisee's protestations, Jesus continues to insist on entering the building. According to him, the professional mourners laugh at him, and the Pharisee accuses him of necromancy. He dismisses both of these individuals. On the other hand, Jairus, Simon Peter, James, and John are the only people who are permitted to accompany him to the girl's room. At the time of their arrival, Jairus' wife is incensed that he was absent, but he begs her to put her faith in him and in Jesus. After hearing Jesus whisper, "Talitha cumi," which translates to "Arise, my daughter," she immediately comes to. At this point, Jesus reveals to all of them that they are not permitted to discuss what they have witnessed, not even with the other disciples. It is not yet time for the information that he possesses this kind of authority to be published in the media. After expressing gratitude to Jairus for his faith, he is about to depart when the Pharisee confronts him. He claims that Jesus touched a lady who was bleeding and a dead body, both of which would mean that he would be considered ritually unclean. In response to his threat to denounce Jesus to the Sanhedrin if he does not follow the regulations for cleaning, Jesus responds by assuring him that the girl is not dead and that the lady is not bleeding. While Nathanael and Thaddeus are in the process of transporting water through a shortcut, they come across a trail of blood. In the process of following it, they come across Veronica, who is passed out. It is then that she confesses her condition to them when they offer to get her a doctor. They make the offer to bring her to their rabbi, and she almost rejects them. However, in the end, she understands who they are talking about and agrees to accompany them. The explanation that she gives is that she does not need to spend his time because she can just touch his clothes. It is their intention to caution her against superstition, but she pushes back and argues that it may be appropriate to do so with other people, but not with him. It is revealed to us during the course of their talk that Veronica's father has severed his relationship with her. When Veronica, Thaddeus, and Nathanael arrived in Capernaum, there was a significant amount of traffic congestion that had been caused by the word that Jesus was going to do a healing demonstration. Thad and Nathanael advise her to stay on the edge of the crowd while they try to get Jesus, but they are unable to push through the crowd. They tell her that she will just have to wait for another time, but Veronica is determined to go to Jesus, and she tells herself over and over again that all she needs to do is touch his garment. During this time, the individual who had previously humiliated Veronica in episode 4 due to her dirty condition has taken note of her and has requested that Yosef remove her. Veronica makes a desperate lunge in an attempt to touch the tassels that are attached to Jesus' cloak. She is threatened with the danger of being removed from the position. Jesus quickly sees what has occurred and calms the throng by demanding to know who touched him. He then asks who touched him. Veronica, who is lying on the ground, reveals that she touched his clothing because she was aware that if he touched her, he would become ritually unclean. Jesse, who is Simon Z's brother, was the one who informed her about his power. Veronica is told by Jesus that it was not his garment that healed her, but rather her faith that did the healing. Jesus is adamant in his assertion that she is pure, despite Yosef's objections that she is still ritually unclean because she has not yet completed the waiting period. As a result of Veronica's demonstration of faith, he expresses his gratitude to her and entrusts her to the care of his disciples. Later on, we witness Veronica use a knife that was given to her by the disciples to cut off the rags that she had been using to stop her bleeding. To experience the satisfaction of being clean, she swims in the Sea of Galilee and basks in the bliss of being clean. At the time of Jesus' arrival, she is worried that she has made him filthy and that he is in trouble. However, Jesus assures her that she should not be afraid because he and the disciples are simply going to go for a swim. The majority of the plotline pertaining to Jesus has been discussed up to this point. However, there is a critical moment that takes place between Jesus and the disciples that does not fit neatly into any of the previous plot lines. Philip asks Jesus when he breaks his fast, that is, eats breakfast, why they do not fast like John's followers and the Pharisees. Philip is concerned that the Pharisees would use this as a weapon against them. In his response, Jesus explains that John taught fasting because it was a season of repentance, but he brings a time of salvation. The kingdom that he delivers does not fit into old frameworks or ways of doing things. He demonstrates this by referring to the parable of the bridegroom and the parable of the wineskins, which can be found in Matthew 9:14-17. The disciples Matthew and little Thomas make the observation that in the parable of the bridegroom, Jesus makes a suggestion about how he would be taken away from them. They express their anxiety, but Jesus tells them that they will have to debate this matter at a later time. Episode 5 of the third season of The Chosen, a review. The majority of the time, I thought Episode 5 to be a satisfying conclusion to the storylines that were introduced in Episode 4, as well as another excellent installment for the third season of The Chosen television show. Nevertheless, I would like to bring to your attention a few concerns that I have. My opinion is that the Eden plot proceeded in a direction that was both daring and entertaining for the most part. In spite of this, I have some inquiries concerning the schedule. After seeing episode 4, I was left with the sense that the apostles' initial missionary journey lasted for around 1 month. In the event that this is the case, and assuming that Eden and Simon became pregnant during the first episode of season 3, she would be in the very early stages of her pregnancy. During the first scene, on the other hand, I had the idea that she was much further advanced in her pregnancy than she actually was. There is a possibility that I am completely wrong about the opening scene. It is possible that she was only a month or 2 into her pregnancy at the time. The fact that she is supposed to be further along in her pregnancy, however, raises a lot of issues about the situation. It would imply that the journey of the missionaries was longer than it appeared to be, which is something I am willing to accept, but more importantly, it would imply that Eden was showing signs, but the disciples who remained in Capernaum, such as Mary Magdalene, Tamar, and Zebedee, did not notice. Otherwise, I would have expected to see signs that they were concerned for Eden. In order to clear up any uncertainty that may have arisen in this situation, it would have been beneficial if the show had discovered a means to convey to us the length of time that the disciples have been absent. I don't have anything against Thad and Nathanael, but I believe that they would be more effective as supporting characters. In my opinion, the significance of the event would have been amplified if the program had allowed Eden, or perhaps Mary, to be the one who introduced Veronica to Jesus. The way in which the show interprets the parable of the wineskins is something that I have a slight disagreement with. I believe that the parable of the bridegroom, the parable of the garments, and the parable of the wineskins are examples of the fact that Jesus often tells 2 or 3 parables that are comparable to one another in terms of their significance. One example of this is found in Luke chapter 15. All 3 of these tales are trying to convey the same message. Certain reactions are only suitable for specific situations. The play is able to provide the parable of the wineskins a new interpretation, which is that the kingdom that I am establishing will not be able to be contained within old frameworks or containers. Despite the fact that I do not necessarily disagree with that concept, I do not find it to be quite convincing as an interpretation. When Veronica interrupted them while they were on their way to heal his daughter, I could not help but believe that Jairus ought to have been a little irritated and impatient. If I were to put myself in his position, I believe that he would have felt a greater sense of urgency. After pointing out a few problems, there were a lot of things about the episode that I liked. Once more, despite the fact that the episode was crammed with content, the plot seemed to be cohesive, and it went well from one story to the next. In addition, despite the fact that the episode successfully addressed a few important narrative lines, it also established several more, which ensures that the season will flow smoothly and have a sense of cohesion. As I have stated before, I believe that the choice to have Eden experience a miscarriage was a courageous one. The portrayal of Lara Silva was outstanding, and the violent nature of the sequence was entirely appropriate, despite the fact that it was difficult to witness. A miscarriage is an event that is not adequately reflected in popular media due to the fact that it is so prevalent. This adds an entirely new degree of complexity to the tension between Eden and Simon, which was already engaging and sympathetic. Despite the fact that the twist causes me to have some issues, I believe that it makes sense for the most part and will make rewatching episode 4 a fascinating experience for those who are committed to maintaining their interest. It is to my great satisfaction that the show did not settle Eden's battle by the time the episode came to a close. That is exactly what I would have anticipated from either the first or second season of The Chosen. Instead, while we watch the disciples rejoice over Veronica's recovery, we are given the opportunity to be present with Eden in her suffering and to experience the range of feelings that she must be experiencing. It was the final shot of her that left me feeling so moved. The show also gave off the impression that it was being somewhat self-aware. The complicated emotional experience that Eden goes through as she watches the disciples celebrate in that final shot almost probably connects with some viewers. This is because some viewers see the exciting and joyful events of the episode in a complicated way due to their own unresolved concerns. The show did a fantastic job of building supple visual connections between the characters of Eden, Veronica, and Miriam. These connections are comparable to the kinds of connections that are created in the Bible through the use of word choice and other literary strategies. As a whole, I find the portrayal of Jairus and Veronica to be satisfactory. Despite the fact that it would have been simple to overact their roles, I felt their portrayal to be both believable and emotionally touching. My initial reaction to Zebedee's speech to James and John was one of skepticism, yet I realized that it impacted me much more than I had anticipated. Although I can now get the reason why they chose to leave the scene in which he is selling the boat, I can't help but think whether the moment would have been more satisfying if it had been a surprise. Minor narrative lines, such as the rivalry between John and James, Simon the Zealot's pursuer, and Gaius' kid, are being progressed in a satisfactory manner by the show. The Simon/Gaius interaction is something that I continue to adore. The banter between them was entertaining, and it brought to mind a realistic portrayal of the challenges that early Jews and Gentiles would have encountered while attempting to form connections with one another. A really good job was done with the claustrophobia and turmoil that was present in the crowd scene. While simultaneously managing a large number of characters and plot beats, the show was able to generate exactly the kind of atmosphere it was trying to achieve. The Chosen Season 3 Episode 5 covers the following key themes. The 5th episode of The Chosen Season 3 is the second half of a 2-part arc, and it continues up on many of the ideas and themes that were introduced in the 4th episode. I will begin by examining these, and then I will move on to discussing some of the themes that were exclusive to Episode 5. In the 5th episode, we are presented with a number of additional pictures that emphasize the delight of serving Jesus. We witness the jubilant reaction of the disciples to the healing of Veronica, as well as the jubilant reaction of Jairus, his wife, and the 3 apostles to the healing of his daughter. We also saw the joy that Jesus experienced as a result of the faith that Veronica and Jairus had in him. The disciples are shown enthusiastically celebrating in the Sea of Galilee as a result of what they have witnessed Jesus perform. This is the most crucial aspect of the narrative. Another topic that is brought up multiple times in discourse is that of happiness. In the beginning of the episode, Zebedee can be heard expressing his happiness that James and John have discovered their real calling, and that he too is able to follow a new calling in the service of Jesus. When Jesus is asked by his followers why he does not require them to fast on a regular basis, he uses the parable of the bridegroom to explain that the arrival of salvation in him is a time of joy, and that fasting is not a time for grief and fasting. In the following passage, Jesus will reject the professional mourners who have come to lament over Jairus' daughter Miriam. This parable prepares us for what will happen later on. During the time that Simon and Gaius are working on the cistern, the subject of celebration is also brought up. Gaius is of the opinion that Roman parties are superior because to the sensuality, but Simon is of the opinion that Jews know how to rejoice, that is, experience genuine joy in their own unique way. Despite the fact that we see and hear about a lot of happiness, Episode 5 ultimately leaves us with a really melancholy sensation. Episode 5 highlights the complicated relationship between the joy and the expense of serving Jesus by nestling the pleasant events of the episode between such a terrible starting scene and such a haunting final image. This allows the program to highlight the complexity of the relationship. It is important for churches to take note of the following. While it is right for us to celebrate when we see God working in a magnificent way, we must not forget that others who look out on our celebration may be carrying sorrows that are not visible to us. Because it reminds them of how God appears to be absent from their troubles, and because they feel pushed to wear a mask, it may be painful for them to be present in the middle of our joy that we are experiencing. From my perspective, that is how I understood what was going on with Eden. A further layer of complication is added to the events that take place in Episode 4 by the sudden turn of events. The joy that Simon experienced during his trip was mostly at the expense of his wife, who was forced to go through the ordeal of a miscarriage by herself, alone, without his support. Even while I have faith that Eben will eventually overcome her sorrow and experience joy once more, the price that she has paid for her suffering is something that she will never be able to get back. It is important to note that in Episode 5, Jesus makes his first prediction of his own death through the parable of the bridegroom. This is something that should be taken into consideration as we are examining the cost of following Jesus. In spite of the fact that he makes an effort to rapidly move on from the subject at hand, it is evident that the disciples are uncomfortable with the idea that Jesus is leaving. When he begins telling people that they need to consume his body and drink his blood after the process of feeding the 5,000, I anticipate that they will be even more concerned than they already are. During the fourth episode, Jairus and Yusuf spent a significant amount of time discussing the expenses associated with discovering the truth about Jesus. Due to the fact that Jairus is in a desperate situation in episode 5, there is very little time for debate. To add insult to injury, his major priority is not the truth, rather, it is the survival of his daughter. However, in the same way that there is a price to pay for discovering the truth, there is also a happy payoff. As a result of Jairus' previous efforts to discover the truth about Jesus through the use of Yusuf's testimony and the scriptures, he is aware of who he should consult in the event that his daughter needs medical attention. The fact that the Pharisee makes a cameo at the very end of the episode is a cause for concern. The fact that Jairus is now publicly identified with Jesus means that he will be forced to pay the price when the Sanhedrin investigates what took place, despite the fact that his search of the truth has been beneficial up until this point. In the fifth episode, the concept of ceremonial purity and cleanliness is investigated further, especially via the perspectives of Miriam, who is Jairus' daughter, and Veronica, who is the bleeding lady. In order to shield themselves from the impurity of Miriam and Veronica, the Pharisees approach the situation with terror. The fact that Yusuf is certain that Jesus is capable of performing miracles does not change the fact that when confronted with Veronica's uncleanliness, he is more concerned with containing the contamination than he is with bringing her to Jesus for treatment. In the same manner, when Jesus arrives at Jairus' house, the Pharisees' anxiety with the possibility of contamination caused by touching the deceased causes him to become a barrier between the girl and salvation. On the other hand, Jesus seems completely unconcerned with the possibility of being tainted by filth. Despite the fact that Yusuf and the other Pharisees tell Jesus that he must purify himself since he has come into contact with ceremonial impurity, Jesus vehemently disregards their request. The reason for this is not that he disagrees with the teachings of the Old Testament on ritual impurity, rather, he just has a better understanding of his own authority, which causes him to apply the law of Moses in a less conventional manner. The Pharisees have a category for physical treatment, but they do not have a category for the type of holistic healing that Jesus provides. This type of healing can not only remove physical ailment, but it can also remove impurities that are associated with rituals and spirituality. It is only Jesus who has the potential to disseminate purity and cleanliness, in contrast to the majority of people who propagate impurity and contamination. The Sistine and the Gentiles, notably Gaius, were also introduced in episode 4, which established 2 additional sources of uncleanness. During the 5th episode, we are given a deeper comprehension of the reasons why each of them is unclean. Gaius, on the one hand, divulges more information regarding his beliefs and behaviors as an unclean pagan, which include rituals such as wild parties, many gods, and transactional sacrifices. Gaius, on the other hand, is able to comprehend the spiritual significance of the Sistine that is not clean. His realization is a reaction to Simon's mention of Jeremiah, which is as follows: "Have people in a country changed their gods, despite the fact that they are not gods? However, my people have altered their grandeur in order to pursue something that is not profitable. My people have committed 2 sins. They have abandoned me, the source of living waters, and they have hacked out cisterns for themselves, shattered cisterns that are unable to retain any water. Be astonished, O heavens, at this, be shocked, be completely fallen, declares the Lord, since my people have perpetrated these 2 evils." Jeremiah 2:11-13, Holy Scriptures. Gaius comes to the conclusion that the broken cistern is a symbol that the Jews have done something that has angered God as he goes through the process of reflecting on the prophecy. It is noteworthy to notice that in Jeremiah's prophecy, the shattered cisterns are a metaphor of the idols that the Israelites turned to rather from remaining loyal to Yahweh alone. However, it is almost probable that Gaius did not mean for this to be the case. It is possible that I am reading too much into this, but I am curious as to whether or not the show is implying that the Jews who lived during the time of Jesus have fallen into a form of idolatry, worshipping the works of their hands in the same way that Gaius and the other unclean Gentiles do. Compare this with Stephen's sermon in Acts 7, which implies that the Jewish leaders are treating the temple as if it were an idol. If The Chosen decides to explore the possibility of a parallel in subsequent episodes, we will have to wait and see what happens. Naturally, the consequence of all of this is that both Jews and Gentiles need to turn away from the works of their hands and embrace the source of purifying water that God has supplied in Jesus. This is the case regardless of whether they are Jewish or Gentile. In addition to reiterating these themes from the previous episode, Episode 5 had a few novel topics of its own, including the following. In the first biblical story of the healing of the bleeding woman, also known as Veronica, and Jairus' daughter, both women are referred to as daughters, and Jesus demonstrates a great deal of compassion and care for them. The inference is unmistakable. Jesus watches over women who are in need with the compassion and concern of a father who loves his children. On the 5th episode, this dynamic is translated from the first account, but it goes even further than that. It is revealed to us that Veronica has been disowned. When Jesus refers to her as his daughter, he is compassionately claiming a woman who has been rejected by the very man who ought to love her the most, and in doing so, he offers her a new identity. Moreover, an additional daughter is introduced in the 5th episode of the series. There are a number of visual indicators that lead us to believe that Eden is comparable to Miriam and Veronica. As an illustration, there is a visual comparison between the position of Eden in the opening scene and the position of Miriam in the scene that follows. Also, there is a clear parallel between the blood of Eden and the bleeding of Veronica. In spite of the fact that Eden does not experience the active compassion of Jesus during the length of Episode 5 in the same manner as Veronica and Miriam do, Jesus unequivocally recognizes her suffering while they are participating in the breakfast. Despite the fact that it is distressing to witness Eden's struggle at the conclusion of the episode, we are encouraged to have faith that she may eventually experience the same compassion that we witnessed Veronica and Miriam have. During the 5th episode, we witnessed how the effects of the pressures of the world are causing certain followers to become excessively suspicious and defensive of themselves. Thaddeus is informed by Nathanael that Simon was meeting with Gaius, and it is evident that Nathanael is concerned that Simon might be inclined to sell them out. When Jairus approaches Judas for assistance, Judas's skepticism causes him to be excessively cautious and irritating to Jairus. The worry that Yosef has regarding Veronica's lack of cleanliness appears to be consistent with this trend as well. On the other hand, the brief presence of the Zealot assassin serves to remind us of the reasons why the disciples, and particularly Simon Z, have a valid reason to be suspicious.